Today on The Rocks, I'm excited to welcome my friend Candace MacGibbon. Candace is passionate about the resource sector, and she's embarking upon a journey to advocate for and promote the mining, energy, and agricultural sectors at a national level within Canada. Her goal is to convey the benefits of the resource sector and its role in the transition to a carbon-neutral economy. In doing so, she seeks to liaise with senior leaders and policymakers within the sectors to promote the progressive efforts made by Canadian companies, talk about the challenges facing the industries, and combat common public misconceptions. Candace brings over 25 years of experience in the mining sector and capital markets. She's the former CEO of INV Metals, a Canadian mineral resource company focused on the development and exploration of the Loma Larga gold property in Ecuador, which was acquired by Dundee Precious Metals in 2021. She's also currently a director of Osisko Gold Royalties and Carbon Streaming Corporation, where she brings to bear her significant financial, technical, government relations, communications, and ESG experience. With that, let's jump in. Well, Candace, welcome to On the Rocks. So excited to have you here for actually our 50th episode. So really, really excited to talk to you today. What are you drinking?
Congratulations on 50. I'm going to be quite stereotypical here. It's a vodka with water with a lemon. But cheers. Cheers. In a nice pretty glass.
Is it a special vodka? Or
but I'm not discriminate, but if I must tell you my favorite, it's Grey Goose.
Okay. All right. Well, I am drinking in honor of our 50th episode, a gift from Jess Scanlon, who helps me with the podcast. She brought this to me at Precious Metals Beaver Creek, Orphan Girl Bourbon Cream Liqueur. So it's kind of like a Bailey's, but made with bourbon. And the Orphan Girl is out in Butte. It's now the centerpiece of the World Museum of Mining, a testament to Butte's rich legacy. And it's really cool. It's from Headframe Spirits. So we've got a true mining theme going on. And again, I think it's a good sign when you run a podcast that people bring you bourbon to mining conferences as gifts. I either have a problem or we're getting some pretty good recognition. So thank you, Jess, for the bottle. I'm excited to try it. And on that note, for our 50th episode, I thought it would be cool to remind our listeners that Prospector does On the Rocks as a way to talk about the mining industry and exploration as well in a non-traditional way. Hopefully we're fun to listen to, easy to listen to, and introduce the kind of wider world to the cool stuff that our industry does and the cool people that work inside of it so that we can kind of increase the awareness of what we do, why it's important, how we operate, and really the whole reason we do this podcast is to get it so folks are excited about exploration and mining, start to trust the industry a little bit more, pay closer attention, maybe invest in a mining or exploration company here or there. And I know that's something that you are equally passionate about, Candace. So if you could maybe talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Awesome. I applaud your efforts to bring mining to a broader audience. It's imperative that we continue this conversation. Look, I'm going to get into kind of some technical aspects here about our lives, but everything we are doing right now in order to communicate, everything we're sitting on, everything that is above our head, it comes from resources. And the old adage for you and I and those in this business is if you do not grow it or you do not mine it, you do not use it. And I really don't believe that the general public walking around in downtown or in a possibly more so in a rural area where they have farming equipment and things like that, where it is more to do with agriculture, possibly, they don't understand how much mining plays a role in their day-to-day lives. And it's so important as we move forward in the transition from a fossil fuel-based energy and transport world into a net zero world, that mining, people know exactly what they use on a daily basis so that they can not make generalizations when it comes to stopping mining projects or understanding that it's maybe not in their backyard or not in their country. It's for other countries and other people to worry about, which is not, we can't have that kind of thinking as we move forward.
Yeah, I mean, that whole not in my backyard can be a huge challenge in the mining space. We've talked about that on a few episodes, but I think increasingly now where countries and communities want to make sure they understand where the raw material is coming from for all of those things that you articulated, right, that we use every day. And they want to make sure those things are mined responsibly and manufactured responsibly. And I think really for us as an industry, if we don't get out and tell that story, someone else is going to tell it for us, right? I mean, that's just the kind of harsh reality.
Emily, you hit the nail on the head there. The narrative surrounding mining has been told by people not in the industry for the past few decades, I would say. We've put our heads down. We've done our job with regards to bringing up ESG, bringing up the CSR, which of course is now transitioned into all corporate companies globally, which it needs to have, very, very specific guidance as to those that with capital and those who don't necessarily have capital, so that we have very, very good governance around that. However, what needs to happen is that people need to understand that there is a cost to believing everything they read. And our industry just hasn't been there present to tell our story. I would like more people like you telling our story, more leaders in the industry telling their stories, and everybody working in this industry telling their stories, because the stories are good in most situations and the stories are real, and we make a difference in a positive way in the world. Not to say that we haven't done serious environmental harm at times and we haven't put people at risk at times, which is clearly unacceptable in both situations.
So how do you think we got here to where the industry is so reticent to tell that story or isn't part of the conversation? Do you have a theory on like what happened?
My theory is that the mining industry in resource-rich countries, so for instance in Canada, it's old and it dates back way before the 1900s. Gold has been around for thousands and thousands of years. It's been coveted by emperors and such. And I believe that we put our head down. We had the Industrial Revolution. Everybody understood that this is where things came from. And then we got so far removed from where the things that we utilize every day come from, i.e. Amazon. Well, if you believe it comes from the fairy dust in the Amazon warehouse and it doesn't have a supply chain behind it, that's a bit of a knowledge gap. And people don't have any access to things that tell them where the products that they're ordering, where their food, all of that type of thing come from. Now there's a massive movement, of course, for farm to table food. We almost need a massive movement on where does the mouse that I'm using come from? Where are the raw materials in it? So people understand, so kids understand where it comes from. That there's a mine somewhere in the world, and then there's a petrochemical plant that took the oil that came out of the ground from Alberta or from the Middle East and or the United States to process it, how it was processed, and all the people that do all that kind of thing. And it's just, we've become so removed because most of the people live in cities. Most of the people have these products that are at the store, and we just haven't done a good job because frankly, we're so removed from the miners are very much removed from the end product. From this type of thing, not from gold, right? I mean, if it's a gold bar, which is going into a vault, then that's a different story. It's just we need to be, as a society, very much more aware of where things come from.
Yeah, and I think you can see that dramatically in like how and who invests in the mining space, right? It's a relatively very small sector from a market cap perspective, much smaller in my opinion than it should be, right? Because we basically make all the raw materials that are used to make all the things that get sold and technology companies for them to run, right? And it's also kind of the same folks that consistently invest in exploration and mining companies. I'm just referring back. I've got a really interesting stat here that just looking at the S&P, mining companies represent 0.00325% of the S&P 500, but the metal they produce supports industries representing 40%, right? So like there's this dramatic kind of disconnect, if you think about it, in terms of people understanding where their money goes from an investment perspective and therefore also from a consumer perspective. Like there's a huge gap there if we're making all of this stuff but the market doesn't even properly assess the value of the companies that do that.
I couldn't agree more. And I do believe that the market caps of all those companies that utilize inputs, there should be a huge onus on them because they have much larger access to capital to finance the ESG that's involved and the reclamation for environmental issues, all of those types of things. As we have new agreements with Indigenous peoples, as we have new responsibilities to take care of remediation, all of which are very, very critical to the planet's success, they should have more of a cost to bear, frankly, the consumer, rather than just the company for which is providing the raw material. Because as you know, there is a lack of financing availability for exploration, for production. There has been an exodus from this sector for various reasons. And yet it's never been more important that the mining industry is at the table to help us with climate change. I'm going to bring it back to that all the time because that is 1,000% what is out of every politician's mouth. We're having mayoral elections here in Ontario, and it's even in the councillors' pamphlets. I can guarantee you most of those councillors don't understand the critical nature that mining is going to play in order for us to get to the point where we're keeping our Paris Agreement targets and commitments of 1.5 degree change in the planet's temperature.
Right. Yeah, no, I think it's a really important point there. And in order for there to be a recognition there, we can either just sit and wait for the market to create a disastrous situation where there's a dramatic lack of supply and therefore companies can't do what they need to do to make things, including electric vehicles, solar panels, lithium ion batteries, right? Or we can more proactively engage with those folks. And I think certainly what we see on the automobile manufacturer side, we're starting to see that, right? And an investment in a support of the raw material companies by Tesla, by GM, by BMW. They're starting to get more and more involved in that. I personally, I've talked a few times about the fact that I think with the transition to the low carbon economy, the green economy, whatever we want to call it, the greater electrification of the world, we need to start thinking about mining and raw materials as an infrastructure investment, right? Because it's really not so much about that short term, are we going to make a ton of money off of this copper mine? And it's more of an existential question of we need this copper in order to continue to grow at the rate that we need to grow and do the kind of big picture things that we want to accomplish, right? In the same way that we invest in ports and rails and roads as infrastructure and even the internet, right, and technology, I think we really need to start thinking about mining and exploration in that way.
Agreed. The politicized nature of mining needs to end. Mining should be an absolute manufacturing sector, and we need to take it off the shouldn't we debate. And it's not this notion of, oh, hey, we got to shut all mining down and it's bad for the planet. We have to have mining to save the planet from future increase in temperature and all the disasters that we've recently seen. I mean, we watched on the news here in Canada, some houses fall into the sea in coastal Newfoundland. In order to do that, mining is going to have to be critical. And I think that there is some hope. We are seeing here in Canada language from our government to say mining is critical. And there is, as well as your government, a task force as far as looking into critical minerals and what we're going to need. The language is there. And the hope that I have is the language wasn't necessarily there. Therefore, the will needs to be first, and then the policy change at a bureaucratic level with regards to permitting and all those types of things needs to follow. That is absolutely critical to attract all the investment. And as you say, if the Fords and the Teslas of the world are the lobbyists with regards to the critical mineral exploration, well, guess who listens to billion-dollar companies, governments? Guess who doesn't tend to listen to tens of millions or junior exploration companies? Governments, right? So it's a matter of who's lobbying the governments to support this. And what we're seeing as a systemic change on the global landscape is that governmental to governmental heads of state are now having these conversations. We don't, as a country, have access to this. You, Canada, as a country, have access to this. What are you doing to secure domestically for us as a democratically stable country the opportunity to buy from you? I think this is critical to the success of just what you were talking about, to that piece of moving this from an ethical, idea-based industry, which it never has been, but has been narratively taken that way, to an industry that is heavily regulated on purpose because we want safety and environmental concerns as a basis. But also we need governments to help us with our conversations with Indigenous people and Indigenous lands so that we do this properly. And we need everybody at the table for that.
Yeah. And I think part of that goes to another topic we've chatted about, which is, pulling new people into that conversation, right? Getting greater participation in the mining and exploration workforce, investor base, stakeholders in general. There's so many conversations about the lack of interest from the younger generation to work in the mining industry. And I think that's another sign of it's a symptom of the same disease, right? Which is a lack of storytelling about what we do and the value we bring.
Totally.
I don't know if you've seen things that are working or that you think are great in that space, but it's something I'm certainly concerned about.
I'm concerned as well. I often go down the rabbit hole of being too concerned about too many issues, not being able to bring a lot of solutions, which isn't helpful for anyone. What I will say is that I believe leaders need to be honest and transparent about what we believe to happen. So I know that the world is going to need new supply of minerals. So do you. We're saying this. Everybody needs to say this. And interestingly, anecdotally, someone told me who's very well respected in the mining space, they're having a conversation with people in the audience, and they may or may not have been young, I don't know. But I'm going to take a liberty here, and I'm going to say they were young. And they were asking, does everybody here store their stuff in the cloud or work on the cloud? And everybody was saying, yeah. Now, does anybody know exactly where the cloud is and what the cloud does? The cloud is on the ground, made of a building with a whole bunch of servers, which are provided for by mining. And that's the kind of thing we need to have. That's the narrative, that's the discussion. Because when this new generation rolls up and they have their cell phones and they have their iPads and they drive in their Teslas, they do not understand that none of it can be provided for without a significant increase in mining production. We cannot switch. Yeah. We cannot just maintain our current production levels and be part of the solution. Cannot do that. Not to mention the fact that what proportion of percentage of the world doesn't even have access to light, electricity, power, clean water. We're not there yet. We need all of the mining and the copper and everything to do, and the zinc and all of the minerals to be able to provide the world with adequate living conditions. So the twofold and what we need to do is incredible. And I think that the national media has to play a role in getting that message to people, along with everybody, to understand where things come, and that it's just not a good story, frankly, anymore. It needs to be a reality check for everybody.
Again, or maybe a reality show. I would say, we need more mining, not like Gold Rush, right? I'm like, oh man, that show, I get that it's fun and entertaining, but I'm like, that's what people think I do every day.
That's funny. I nominate you. Absolutely. We'll follow you around. And everything that you use can be like, this is 1 ton of metal. This is just,
that'll be the subtitle. Everything you touch, it'll be subtitled how much metal is in it and where it came from. Yeah, I mean, right now a reality show of my life would be me sitting on a lot of Zoom calls, but probably not super entertaining. But I think but I always say, I just don't understand. Somehow the oil and gas industry is light years ahead of us on this one, right? Because there are so many movies about oil exploration, oil companies where they're like the heroes. I always go back to like Armageddon. Should never have been an oil and gas drilling team that like blew up that asteroid. Like that should have been mining people. Like that's what we do. That's not what they do, right? They don't blow stuff up. I mean, at least didn't back then. Now you've got fracking. It's a little bit more understandable, but or more prevalent fracking. But it's there we've got this thing where we're always the bad guy, right? And those narratives, they really matter so much. I just always struggle with that. It's like this correlation between a lack of awareness, and when there is awareness or reference, it's a negative one. And some of it comes from a place of truth, right? Like the lack of diversity in mining company leadership. I certainly understand that part. But our industry globally is incredibly diverse because there are mines all over the world, and it's people from those places that work in them and run them, right? So I'm always trying to figure out how we can start a Prospector Productions film company, to tell some of the crazy stories that happen, because you've worked all over the world. You've got your own crazy stories of working in the industry. They'd be super entertaining.
I agree. They would be super entertaining. Just an anecdote, I need a new vehicle for my children. We have a minivan, and I wanted to go out and buy an electric vehicle, like one that you get to plug in, not a hybrid that generates on fossil fuels. And there is no such vehicle available for purchase at this moment. I could buy a $200,000 Tesla SUV, but I mean, I don't have $200,000 in my bank account waiting for that. If I did, I wouldn't be able to have it for years because of the wait list. So even when we want to do something for the planet right now, we don't have the production, or the switch hasn't happened. So on the switch to these types of things, it's going to take years and years and years and years and years for us to come off the fossil fuel cars. Even when you hear that at sort of COP26, and you'll hear it at COP27 again, where the car manufacturers are moving forward. And on the drilling, I mean, you mentioned that we are the bad guys. And I think the reason we're the bad guys is because we're still here. It takes years and years and years and years to drill off a mining deposit. It takes one hole to have a whole oil well that's producing that you can ship to be refined.
Yeah.
And they're in, they're out. And if it's a long producing well, there's a lot of wealth that can be spread right away with regards to that.
True.
So the energy companies have been able to distribute their wealth much sooner than a mine. It could take 20 years before a job for the local community even becomes available. It's really easy to villainize us when we can't provide benefits until 20 years, which goes back to who is going to be financing the 20-year investment if it's going to take that long, because investors have been burned. I mean, it's a big business to be an NGO these days, and it only takes something that looks like it's going to be good for a community in order for them to say, I don't like that project. Let's go stir up the pot. And this goes back to the conversation that we're having, making sure that the public understands that these are goods that are being used every day by me. I'm using these. So I don't have a right to say, not in my backyard. I don't have a right to say, oh, this is someone else's problem. What you have to say is, are the companies that are doing this responsible? Are they doing something in the area where they're working? Are they utilizing their funds wisely? Are they providing community with good opportunities? Are they safe? Are they being responsible? And if the answers are yes, 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 then that's a good product.
I also think this is where innovation on the finance side, and for folks who are listening kind of chronologically to the episodes, the one before this, we were talking with Sonia from BHP about their Explore program and some innovative ideas they have on that. And I think a part of what needs to change on the investment and finance side of the mining industry is, if there's more money up front because there's a lower level of risk on early stage projects, there's so much time in that 20-year window that could be reduced, because you've got essentially geologist CEOs out there trying to raise a few $100,000 to put in another drill hole, right? And this stuff happens on like a weather related cycle in a lot of places. It happens on, there are all these reasons why it takes so long to discover and then, really define and build out and get a project ready for mining. That doesn't happen in oil and gas. We talked a little bit about the fact that in oil and gas, you really approach things from a systems view, a much larger, almost district scale understanding of what's going on, where the way that we operate traditionally in the mining space is you've got prospectors that go out and stake a small little, piece of land, and you might have 20 of them in an area. And there's less incentive for collaboration rather than competition on a fundraising perspective, right? So that time to benefit could really be shortened if perhaps there were new models that came in from a finance perspective that did figure out how to reduce the risk, because so many projects never get built, right? They turn out not to have anything of economic value. But how can we incorporate technology and innovation on the discovery side that lowers that risk and increases the amount of capital that's available earlier on for these companies so they can shorten that time to benefit? I think we almost have to figure that out in order to get as much metal out of the ground as we're going to need in the next 20 years. Like we just can't catch up. Like the numbers don't work unless we do something.
No, the numbers do not work. And that's another thing people don't understand is that we would need billions of dollars in investment today. And with hurdles that we have with regards to permitting and all of the type of thing, and whether or not something's going to be economic and whether or not the ground conditions need extra study, all of those things, we could not meet the demand that we are going to need to reach our 2050 net zero goals. Yeah. I mean, we needed to be doing this yesterday, and we're not doing it yesterday. There are some metals that have had a good run, I would say, in the near term, but they need really large investments from an infrastructure perspective from governments to either get them viable so that they have roads and things like that. Anyway, beyond that, I agree. We're going to need the world to understand there will be a reckoning anyway. We need investment. But on the form of alternative investment, I think we're onto something for the end. I think finally the downstream people who use our commodities are thinking, oh dear, we have hundreds of thousands of people in our industries who we employ. We have investors, and what we're not going to have are the raw materials and the inputs for our products in the future. And they are going to hopefully help us with regards to this differential, because they're going to have to invest, because General Joe out here who used to make a few bucks on an exploration story is saying, I'm out. I like systemically here. I don't have support from all the people who I need support for this to come up. And we are still not seeing that. I hope that we're going to see more in strategic investment, which will then bring the retail back in, because there's the lobby, there's the money, there's the big players sitting at the seat with the people who use this. Before it was just countries making sure that we had steel for development, making sure we had copper for electrification, all of those things, which was there. The industry just did what it needed to do when we need to do it. But there's such a seismic shift in what we're going to need that we're all going to have to work together.
Yeah, and I think it's also a bit of a mind shift on the mining industry side, that you can't continue, if that's the model we shift to, a greater like vertical integration with the end user or the manufacturer, as an example. You can't continue to think you're going to add share price value by adding ounces, right? You've got to have a plan to bring this stuff into development and actually mine it. Because these companies are not going to invest in your project because they want you to just keep drilling for the next 5 to 7 years and bump your share price up, right? They're investing in you because they want you to actually mine that stuff so they can use it. And frankly, like I sit in a lot of investment pitches with juniors, and it is very rare that I talk to someone, granted with an early stage project, but somebody who even at that stage is talking about, here's how we would build this mine, or how we think we might build it and what it means, right? The incentives at the early stage are all around growing the asset and essentially exiting, selling it to a mid-tier, right, and getting out. Yeah. And I think that's going to be something we're also going to have to kind of figure out. And I know you've certainly done your time on the finance side. And I don't know what you I'm just a geo. What do I know? What do you think?
I think you know a lot. I agree. I think what we're going to see is governments are going to need to play a role in this. The issue with not being able to build it is one from a major right down to the junior. We can't, because there are so many hurdles in the way of being able to take a deposit, take the investment. And I'll give you a specific example, which is very concrete. If you need an environmental assessment report or some form of understanding how your initial exploration is going to impact the environment, that needs probably, let's say 10 times more money than your $100,000 or $200,000 that's going to go into the drill program. There is such a barrier now to entry for exploration that, how can you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to understand how your drilling is going to impact the discrete area surrounding that, not knowing if there is anything in the ground that is economic whatsoever? So you need $2 million just to put a drill hole in the ground. And that's just been something that the industry has had to deal with over the past couple of decades. Now, how do we change that, right? How do we go back to people and say, well, the regulation is so much harder, we can't bring the money here.
Right.
So if a government wants that to be the regulation, rightly or wrongly, then I believe there has to be some form of alternate financing for that. Maybe there's a pool from taxes that says these are going to be the initial exploration. This is going to fund that. It's going to take a lot longer, because what happens at that level is that the governments also don't have the people working in the environmental ministry that have the expertise in order to approve these. So they're sitting on a desk, or they don't have the will. And that's hard. So you're dealing with the governments, you're dealing with the resource constraints within the departments which are regulating these industries, and put that all together, it just means that things don't move fast, which means, here's the thing, if you can get through all those hurdles and you're waiting for the one permit, the operational permit, and some NGO rolls around and says, oh, but there's a tree there, and you say, yes, there's a tree. We know there's the tree. Well, that tree is important to me because of whatever, and then the government doesn't give you a permit, and you've spent $1 billion.
Yeah.
There are examples of that. How do we remove that is what we're going to need to talk about as an industry. And what I'm hopeful on is that finally people like Ford and General Motors and Tesla, because of the commitments they've made at COP26 and we're going to make again at COP27, are going to need to be at that table.
Right.
They're going to see how hard it is to have that conversation at the table. They're going to understand there are very real issues that we're facing, and we might not be able to do what they think that we can do. And then the conversation has to shift.
Right. Yeah, I think that's such an incredible point, because, again, it goes back to this idea of, if the larger world wants us to innovate, find new stuff, find new ways to mine it, find new ways to do it faster, right? One of the biggest barriers to innovation is if there are mechanisms built in where you can't fail early and often, right? That's the biggest thing about technology, is you want to get stuff out there. You want to test your assumptions or hypotheses. If it's wrong, okay, pick yourself up, go find something else, right? And if you're having to go through that kind of a process to maybe test a geologic model on where you think something might be, right, or your hypothesis about that, it's not going to work. And you're going to get stuck in the same old, right? Where there's a lower level of risk because people have done it before. The community is already supportive, right? And they already understand everything. So you're never going to push out past kind of where we are right now.
Agreed. I tell you, if I was running an innovation company right now in the mining space, I'll tell you whose doors I would be looking and knocking on for capital. The energy guys. They've got billions of dollars in cash. They are going to be looking to deploy that access into things that are going towards carbon neutral, so they can get credit for that. And everyone and anybody who's a signatory of a COP26 or a COP27 pledge, because they're going to have to put their money where their mouth is. And so they're the ones that, if an R&D budget or a general corporate fund for climate change and for those things can be allocated to the R&D necessary for those things. That's where I would be going for my funding. And as well as there's a little bit of governmental funding, but I think going to the private sector is just so much more efficient.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Much more flexible.
You might get the odd person there that understands, or the odd board that is going to be thinking now, okay, we've made these pledges. How do we do it? We're going to need to invest. And these are the people, because they're leaders in this industry, that we want to pair up with. Yeah, exactly.
Well, we've basically spent the whole episode talking about change we want to see in the industry, but I want to close out our 50th episode by asking you this year's question, which is, if you could wave a magic wand and change one thing about the mining industry, what would you love to see?
Oh, it would be absolute perception for me. I think that with a public that understands how and what we utilize the stuff on a daily basis comes from, where it comes from, then we could just have a transparent conversation about how to get it to people. We're reduce what they actually consume so that we don't have to take as much out.
Yeah.
And 2, actually recycle the materials that we have in a meaningful way. So there's 3 prongs of this: reduce it, recycle, but also then we wouldn't have the narrative. We would just shift the narrative so that we can get down to the business of doing what we need to do, which is the innovation and all of the change over to an electrified society with clean energy.
I love it. Absolutely. I'm there with you. Cheers to that.
Congratulations.
To that shift.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Cheers.
Look forward to seeing you back on soon.